That night, rain was pouring down heavily in a small town on the edge of a forest. Everyone was inside their homes, avoiding the bad weather. But in one old house on the outskirts of town, a young woman named Sari was still awake, sitting in the living room, illuminated by the dim light of a table lamp. Sari had moved into the house 2 weeks ago, after buying it at an incredibly cheap price. Too cheap, she thought, but she didn't think much of it at the time. The house was large, with intriguing old architecture, surrounded by dense trees that added to its mysterious aura. That night, Sari felt something was off. The atmosphere in the house was colder than usual, and there was an unnatural stillness. She tried to distract herself by watching television, but the sound of the heavy rain outside only made her more uneasy. Suddenly, the power went out. The room plunged into darkness, leaving only the sound of the rain beating against the windows. Sari fumbled for her phone, trying to turn on the flashlight. When the flashlight came on, she directed the light around the room. Everything seemed normal, but the feeling of unease persisted. Sari decided to go to the kitchen to find some candles. As she walked down the long hallway connecting the living room to the kitchen, she felt as if something was following her. She stopped for a moment and glanced back, but the hallway was empty. Sari took a deep breath, convincing herself that it was just her imagination. In the kitchen, Sari found some candles in a drawer and quickly lit them. The candlelight slightly dispelled the darkness, but couldn't chase away the fear creeping into her chest. As she turned to head back to the living room, she caught something out of the corner of her arja. Dark figure at the end of the hallway, standing still. Sari froze, her eyes fixed on the figure. It appeared faintly in the candlelight, but was clearly not an ordinary shadow. It was about 2 meters tall, taller than an average human, and didn't have a human shape. It looked more like a large, amorphous shadow. Its body seemed to be made of dense darkness, and even though it had no face, Sari felt as though it was staring at her. Sari tried to scream, but no sound came out of her mouth. Her legs felt heavy, as if they were anchored to the floor. The figure slowly began to move toward her, though it didn't take steps. It seemed to glide, approaching in an unnatural way. With every movement, the air around it grew colder. Panicking, Sari finally managed to move her legs and ran back to the living room. She slammed the kitchen door shut, pressing her back against it. But the sense of safety didn't last long, because from behind the door, Sari heard a soft, rhythmic tapping sound, like fingers tapping on wood. The tapping grew faster and faster until the door started to shake violently, as if something on the other side was trying to get in. Sari knew she couldn't stay there. She ran up the stairs to her room on the 2nd floor. Once inside, she locked the door and leaned her back against it, trying to catch her breath. But from behind the door, she heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. Each step echoed through the house as if the wooden floor was about to crack under a heavy weight. The footsteps stopped right outside her door. Sari's heart pounded so hard she thought it might explode out of her chest. Then, the tapping sound resumed, this time on her bedroom door. The tapping was very soft, but very deliberate. Sari couldn't hold back her fear any longer. Tears streamed down her face. In the oppressive silence, Sari heard a faint voice, almost like a whisper from behind the door. Open the door. Sari covered her ears, trying to block out the voice. But the voice grew louder, echoing its command throughout the room. Opened the door. She crawled towards the bed, hiding under the blanket, hoping this was just a nightmare she could wake up from. But the tapping and the command didn't stop. Instead, it seemed as if the figure was already inside the room with her. Sari finally decided to do something brave. She grabbed her phone and called her friend, Rena, who lived not far from the house. Rena answered with a sleepy voice. Sari? What's wrong? It's late. Sari struggled to steady her voice. Rena, please come to my house now. There's something here. But before Sari could explain further, the phone began to crackle. And then Rena's voice came through. But it wasn't her usual voice. It was cold and full of mockery. Sari, I'm already here. Suddenly, Sari's phone died. She stared at the blank screen, feeling like the world was collapsing around her. The tapping sound returned, but this time, it came from the closet in the corner of the room. With trembling hands, Sari looked towards the closet. She could sense something behind the closet door, something terribly wrong. Slowly, the closet door creaked open slightly, and Sari saw a pair of glowing red eyes in the darkness within. The closet door opened wider, and the dark figure emerged, clearer than before. It moved towards the bed with slow but deliberate movements. Its red eyes never left Sari, who was frozen in fear under the blanket. Sari felt her body freeze, paralyzed by an unseen force. The figure now stood right beside her bed, its shadow enveloping Sari entirely. It leaned down, bringing its dark, faceless head close to Sari's face, and Sari could feel the cold breath emanating from its mouth. Then, in an instant, the figure touched Sari's forehead with its icy finger. Sari felt her body go rigid, and her vision began to blur. In the last moments of her consciousness, she heard the figures whisper in her ear, "Now, you're mine." Sari was never seen again. The next morning, Rena and some townsfolk came to Sari's house after being unable to reach her. They found the house in disarray, and Sari's bedroom door was locked from the inside. When they managed to break it down, they only found the bed in a mess. But Sari was nowhere to be found. The townsfolk began to talk about the house, recalling its dark history. Years ago, the house had been the home of a mysterious man involved in dark practices. After his death, the house had changed hands several times, but every owner always disappeared mysteriously. The house was once again vacant, and rumors about the haunting within spread even further. People said that anyone who heard tapping in the middle of the night in that house would never escape. And now, the house still stands on the edge of town, waiting for its next victim who might dare to enter, never knowing what lurks in the darkness of its hallways.